I've been helping Jay, the guy who runs this show out. He's just had a kid, so I'm taking over and moderating of some of his panels, which has caused some of the panelists some concern because I tend to ask prickly questions. This will not be one of those experiences because esports is, to quote my 12-year-old, the shit. And it is seemingly right now an area where the markets in general are making a big push. I sort of liken it to cannabis in 2014, where everyone knew they needed to be in weed, but didn't really know what that meant or how they were going to do it, and a lot of the early schemes ran out of steam. Real esports, for those that don't know, basically replacing pro sports. I was just telling the guys that I found out last week that my kids had spent $6,000 of my credit card on in-game purchases independently of one another over the last 2 months. So with that sort of money being earned by Google right now, where is the rest of the money going to end up? My thinking is it's not going to be in buying esports teams. It's going to be in developing games. It's going to be in developing infrastructure, and it's going to be in real-world experiences that allow people to go to a real-world venue to do what they can't actually do technically online just yet. So with that in mind, I've got 3 guys here that are on the pointy end of all of those. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves and maybe give a quick 2 minutes on what your companies individually do.
My name is Anthony Brown. I'm the CEO of Amped. We're concentrated on basically high-performance computing in the cloud and the platforms that enable things like esports and virtual reality.
All right, that's right. My name is Jappiassu. I'm the CEO of YDreams Global. We are public trading on TSXV. We create virtual reality games, and we're bringing esports to that and creating some other events that mix virtual reality and esports.
I'm Wil Mozell. I'm director of Axion Games, which is part of Axion Ventures. We currently have a studio in Shanghai creating a third-person action RPG title alongside Tencent in a market that has over 500 million active gamers, and I think close to $38 billion being spent on gaming. So right now our title just went open beta in August, and we're really excited about the next few months of development on that.
So a lot of people sort of ask me as somebody who's an enthusiast of esports, like, why? I remember a couple of years back watching my kid watching someone else play FIFA on Twitch and saying, why are you doing this? Why aren't you out playing? Why aren't you playing the FIFA yourself? And he turned to me and said, yesterday morning you were watching West Ham versus Arsenal. Why weren't you in the park kicking a ball? So after I gave him a thick ear, I started really thinking about this and thinking, is this really going to be the way forward? Is this the new way to do sports? And I feel like it isn't. I feel like it's an extension of a shift in content in general. Mothers aren't teaching their kids how to do makeup anymore. They're learning from YouTube makeup channels. Kids are learning how to properly work out on YouTube tips. No one's watching TV. I just let my cable TV go. I hadn't watched it in 3 months. You guys, although you're involved in esports, do you really consider yourselves esports companies, or do you think that the platforms and the content of the future is something that expands far beyond that?
Well, certainly in our case, it is far beyond that. So esports is one component of the things that we address with high-performance computing. The way the internet is right now, the way cloud runs right now, is designed to run the applications that people use today. The stuff that's coming, virtual reality, multiplayer virtual reality, AI, IoT, machine learning, all of those sort of things require a much higher compute platform, more parallelized, lower latency, and latency is where the esports stuff hits. Right? That's what all the players complain about. Oh, well, I only lost because I had a 40 millisecond and you had a 20 millisecond, and you know they have their arguments. So getting that last mile, getting the end user to be able to connect to the servers at a low ping rate, being able to build out the infrastructure that itself is low latency is going to be really important moving forward for these guys, especially as the fidelity raises. We get into 3D spaces and virtual reality. It's going to be a big impact from that standpoint. So it does go beyond esports into all the new technologies that are coming to bear over the next few years.
Daniel, you've had a lot of experience in immersive tech for around 15 years with YDreams before it came up here. And your list of clients is extensive, but esports is maybe one small part of all the things that you've done. Can you explain some of the scope of the tech that you've worked on?
Yeah, it's something that we want to get more and more involved, and that's because that's when the new generation's mind. We use technology as a communications company, right? We're trying to talk to the people and use technology, immersive technology, interactive technology, because that's how they relate right now, right? It's touching screens and it's navigating to augmented reality, and that's how they like to absorb that information. And esports is a result of a cultural revolution that is going on with their generations, right? 8-year-olds and up. So we have to catch up and deliver that. And so we are creating a whole industry based on a very strong habit. So we're just following the trend. As a technology company, you have to evolve as technology is changing and mutating all the time. When we started YDreams, mobile devices weren't popular, and they're huge. And so obviously the company needs to adapt. The same thing with virtual reality. I started the company in 2007, there's no virtual reality. And then in 2014, virtual reality becomes a new deal, and then we jump right in the beginning of it. So I think it's the same thing with esports.
Well, you're partnered up with Tencent, which is obviously a gigantic, sprawling megalith that has its tentacles in every part of everything. You're very focused on games, but do you view games the same way that you would have, say, 3 years ago as two people playing against each other? Or is it more of a social situation? Is it more of a communication? Is it more of a real-world experience?
I think with games, being around since the mid-90s, I've seen multiple different generations of how gaming has hit us culturally. I think the most important thing today, and just on the topic of esports is there, it's real. I think there's so many different stories out there and anecdotes about investment and teams and what have you, but really what we're doing with games in the last 3 to 4 years is we're actually creating celebrities. We're actually making the gamers someone that they want to be. A perfect example is the recent ESPN story with Ninja. 14 million plus subscribers on YouTube. Go and watch him. He plays 6 hours a day. It's actually entertaining what he does in Fortnite. And he's a celebrity. He doesn't have to show up at an esports tournament and have to win ever again. He can just sit there and play. And there's been examples of this probably, I would say, for the last 10 years since we've had great innovation in the last mile connectivity and games that frankly are bringing groups of people together that, and in some ways you could say they're creating social platforms for people to connect over gaming. But again, my whole thing is I think what we're doing in gaming today, and I think it's, cost of entry. If you want to be in games, you got to have features, you got to have content that's going to allow your gamers to be celebrities.
I think it even winds further back down from the celebrity level to the school level. My kid has a little ADHD and we had some social issues in connecting with other kids at school for a while. And one day he asked me if he could set up his own Minecraft server. And I said, all right, you can, but you have to learn everything about it if you're going to do it. So he studied down and he set up his Minecraft server, and before you knew it, all the kids in his class were on his server and doing what he said because he was the boss and he could kick them. Next thing you know, he's got no social problems at school. He's the king of the kids. So I feel like this is something that is allowing people to, instead of just focusing on who's the coolest, who's the best looking, we're now getting to a place where who's the most intelligent or who's got the highest twitch speed under his fingertips is actually letting people get bigger benefits in life. Speaking of socially autistic people, Anthony. Sorry, we met playing D&D together, so I feel like I can make very nasty comments and get away with it. You've been a gamer your whole life. You started out playing RPGs, and the benefit of those RPGs is that same thing, that social aspect, the ability to spend time together and to be someone maybe that you're not in real life. esports and to a greater extent streaming seems to me to be allowing kids to make, not just to be good in a given game, but to make their own avenues of interest. So I feel like we're getting to a place where the kids are actually leading the developers rather than the developers leading the kids. You know, Daniel, when you set up your arcade system there, I remember the first time you went to a tech conference with it, and nobody wanted to try it. Nobody wanted to put on the headset, and until we got someone in there, myself, who texted 100 people and said, "You've got to come and try this." And next thing you know, there's a two-hour queue. People have been trying this thing all through the last couple of days, and I'm hearing everybody say this is amazing. What is it about that experience, as opposed to the typical VR experience, that's really connecting with people?
It's immersive, right? I think most VR that people have tried, it's still only in the first stage of immersion, which means you put the VR, but you don't feel like you're inside the game. What we can do with Arcade is that, first of all, you're inside the game with your full body, and you're walking around this space as if the space was real, as real as it gets. And then you can, in the social, that makes a huge difference, because then you can see your friends, and that perspective sees you're not imagining all this, you're living this, and you can interact with your friends and see, and you become an avatar. I was a role-playing game, big-time RPG guy, and it's almost as now you are the character that you created, right? That's where it's going, and so it's a Ready Player One type of experience, and it's just the next level, and it really trips your body to believe that you are in a completely new world, and that's, I think, where VR can take you.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, you know, a lot of the perception is that, you know, gaming is a non-social activity. Why don't you go outside? Why don't you go play with your friends? Yeah. Why are you staying in the house and playing video games? But as the games become more immersive, as they become more multiplayer, as eSports and being a spectator and being involved in the social aspects of it grow, it becomes more and more of a social activity. And you know, the demo you've got out there is a great example. What happened? You know, half the time I think, you know, when people put on the suits and they're getting ready for the aliens to come out, they're just shooting each other, just, you know, and having a good time. You know, that idea of the Oasis, that idea of, you know, Ready Player One and what's coming down the pipe from a social interaction perspective is really something that to look forward to and to take advantage of.
And that's why we're taking that to a player versus player scenario, where we're going to be competing. And that's where it goes, because right now, if the three of you are playing, then you will see who scored the most, right? Who makes more points. That competitiveness, it needs to be brought into VR as well.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to take the headset off and see if I won. That was awesome.
So, Wil, when you're developing games, obviously there is a large amount of attention paid to what's hot right now. But the real successful games used to be one-offs. They used to be like, we'll do one this year and then we'll do a new one the next year. Now they seem to be ongoing, living, breathing things that stick around for 10 years and are added to over time. Is it more of an intent for you when you're developing games to create that growing community that's going to be around for 15 years, or is it like, let's go right now, what's hot right now?
So I think the exciting thing about the last 5 to 8 years in innovation, a gamer today, I'm a gamer, but from a business perspective, I would say it has everything to do with distribution and disruptive business models. And the distribution innovation about being able to have more people accessing their content in a millisecond has allowed us to actually fully embrace globally games as a service. And that's the key thing that we're talking about, which is a game actually launches today, and I'll just give you a little bit of context, maybe all the way back to the early 90s. When a game launched, you're pretty much looking at that date, like a movie, you're trying to get probably 80% of your revenue in the first 90 days. That has changed over time. There's some hybrid models, but the big titles still focus on a launch day. So some of the most successful titles globally, and one of, we look at where our game is focused right now, Rising Fire, with Tencent, is that this game went open beta in August. It's not completely ready as far as a launch. It's launched and it's now the starting line. And we will work closely with Tencent on this title, monthly updates, and to Chris's point, the lifetime for this game, 8 to 10 years. That is numerous examples of titles in Asia right now. For example, Crossfire, I think lifetime, probably $8 to $10 billion. In its prime 3 years ago, and this is a shooter game that you look at today and you say, people still play it, but they do. And it was peaking at $1.2 billion a year. And that game, again, has been going on for over 8 years. Now it's starting to get tired because we have all sorts of great innovations and slicker looking titles showing up in Asia. The League of Legends here, Fortnite, numerous other titles that are taking everybody by storm, even Clash of Clans. But the most important thing is looking at how do you connect with I actually like to just say it this way. You're going to launch a game, you're creating a handshake and a relationship with your consumer from day one. And your job is to keep that consumer for the life of the product. And it's not a cheap thing to do, it's not an easy thing to do, but that's where all the sophistication is today in games as a service. That's the number one thing we're focused on with Rising Fire and Tencent in China.
So I was also the CEO of Infinite Game Publishing, and we published MechWarrior Online, which was a fairly big title. That game is still running today. It's generates close to $1 million a month in revenue, and this game is now 5 years old, something like that. MechWarrior 5, which is the single-player kind of experience coming out in September 2019, by the way, everybody, just in case. And again, I really like what you said about that handshake that you're making with the players. When we launched the game, before we even went to closed beta, we ran kind of a founders program, we called it. We had $5 million come in 6 weeks just to be able to say, hey, I was a founder. And I get my little founder's badge on my mech. There's 3 million players for MechWarrior Online now. There's tournaments that, six-figure purses. We're not talking Fortnite here, but, still six-figure purses are not insignificant either. It is continually curating that relationship, continually making new content, communicating via the forums. At one point we had a little bit of a tragedy with one of our players. Their daughter was sick, had brain cancer, so we came up with Sarah's Mech, and we sold that her name was Sarah. We sold that for $10 and donated all the money to the Cancer Society. And we did $150,000 of Sarah's Mechs online, right? And that all came from that communication with the community and continually feeding that community with what they wanted.
So I think one of the things maybe we skipped over in the assumption that a lot of people here know what esports is exactly how big it's become. The figures that I saw recently were that in 2015, the NHL Stanley Cup Finals, 8 million people watched. The Major League World Series, I think it peaked out at about 14. The NBA, 22. But the same year, the League of Legends Championship had 38 million people watching it live. And then the number of people who watched after the fact was something like 10x on that. So what we've effectively already done with esports, even though it's news to a lot of the people out there, it's bigger than Major League Baseball. It's bigger than the NFL. And yet we only hear about it if we have 12-year-olds who are watching it on TV and stopping us from watching our own things. How high do you think this can actually get? Is it peaking yet, or are we just still at the thin edge of the wedge?
It's impossible to tell, but it's not peaking at all. I think it's just growing. The more that we realize this is a good business, then the more leagues, the more tournaments, the more money is put into it. I went to E3, and still there was so much to be done at E3, which is the biggest gaming event in the world in LA, and you can only imagine what's going to be in 5 years from now. And then you have phenomena like Fortnite that in 1 year became the biggest game in the world. A free game, right? And that is making, I don't know, billions now on selling skins, right? I sell how I look, I sell how my guy is carrying a backpack, and they're making a ton of money. So it's not peaking. I think now people have their eyes open, so it's just gonna increase. It's gonna get, I think from now on, for the next 5-10 years, it's gonna get insane. To a point that it's gonna be too much, and then we're probably gonna...
Well, I think once we get into the virtual reality side of things, we're going to see another burst then too, right? Right now, esports is primarily the Fortnites and Overwatches and so on, League of Legends. But as the players are going to be able to be more immersed in the experience and watch the game through the eyes of the player and be standing on the field of battle and look around and all that sort of stuff, that stuff's really going to happen. And that's going to see another peak. But I think we're looking a few years out before we start to really see the benefits of that. And then, but it's going to keep going.
I don't know. Daniel seems to have that sort of figured out right now.
As far as the games are concerned, they're definitely coming along a lot faster than people thought they were.
Like I think a Call of Duty in an arena like what you've got out here would be the next level, where it's not just you're not just watching people playing in the game, but they're actually running around an arena.
And you're actually going to get like athletes. Like,
yeah.
They will have
the physical
physical
aspects are actually going to come into play.
Yeah.
I think with esports too, if we look at it from a generation perspective, so the stars are late teens, mid-20s, depending. I'm making a generalization there. So if you think about it, those are the pro athletes. And then we have all the amateurs that are playing at home all night, spending $6,000 on dad's credit card.
Don't remind me.
So, excuse me. So where does the development come from for future pros? And when that's in place, and it's coming, where people are able to actually step outside of their living room to train to be these professional athletes, I think that's when we're going to start seeing true growth on where it goes. Because right now, there's a big gap between our amateurs and our pros.
Actually, I've seen something that's going on in that space, and there's a company, I think Dan is probably here today, Dan Cyback. He's got my eSports Stadium, I think is the name of his company, and it's basically imagine the minor leagues of esports, and they have coaches there. You can what do you do when your kid comes and say, well, I want to be a professional gamer when I grow up?
Well, you die inside.
That's right. Right? No, so much for the Harvard education, But
let me interrupt you. There are now scholarship programs at NCAA schools.
There are.
Where kids are being lured to the school by the strength of their esports program.
That's right, and you can now send your kid once Dan gets his first stadium up in Richmond. You can send your kid down, have professional coaches, have the team, and bring again that social aspect grows even more. You're getting about 1,000-person audience to watch the tournaments. You get local sports. You watch Overwatch League, where they've done major cities each have their own team. Right, it's pretty exciting stuff.
We are opening a VR store facility here in Gastown, and we also going to create an esports training facility. So it's a small venue where you have to, so exactly on that gap that right now, your kid practices, but so it's an amateur level, but there's a high demand for that training facilities for esports. So we're opening one by the end of the year.
So we get roundabout to that big question that we kind of started with, is where is the money going to come from? And I think right now what we're seeing in the marketplace is a lot of good ideas of monetizing this and helping people do that. But the real money isn't going to be in buying an Overwatch team. Like Francisco Aquilini spent $30 million or so on that team. If it wins the next World Championships, they win $1 million. So there's no money in that. Where is the money going to come from? It's going to be from getting people into Rogers Arena every 2 weeks to watch this week's event against London or Shanghai or Paris, which is where you guys come in terms of wiring up the building, or where you guys come in terms of putting together the tech that makes that building able to operate on that high level, or you guys come in on the developing of a game that is esports ready, that will be at the center of these universes. Do you feel like those are the three columns really that support this whole thing, or is there another area that people should be looking for?
Managing athletes, I think, is huge, right? Those are kids that need, like they're brands that sponsor them, so managing, it's almost like managing a professional athlete, but the quantity is so much higher, so that's huge. Organizing tournaments, I think, is going to be the Dota 2 tournament here in Vancouver a couple months ago shows that how big the tournaments can be, but also there's a high demand. My kids had never been to a tournament before, so it shows how little we have access to that still. So there's room for all kinds of different new venues and activities.
If I was to rate them, I think the first place is going to be the guys that are making the high-end content, right? Who's making the most money off of Fortnite? the guys who made Fortnite and the guys who published Fortnite, right? Not necessarily the venues. But so that would probably be number one. Would you guys agree with that? Yeah. So there you go. So that would be number one. That being said, it's also one of the highest risk because you are dealing with you have to put your money in, and then hopefully the game that comes out is going to be successful. The next one down, though, I think is kind of the area that we're concentrating in, and that's because we're doing the picks and shovels. We're building the infrastructure that these games host, that these games run on. We're building the channels that the people will play through to access the games.
Eventually, we'll have the Netflix of video games, right?
We
won't download them anymore.
This is coming pretty quickly, right? There are already examples of it in Europe and Asia. I think we need a little bit more last mile glass to really take advantage of it here in North America, but that's coming, and certainly that's something that we're focused on. But yeah, I'd kind of look at those things, and then where the next level comes in is the guys that can get all the sponsorships, the guys that can get Coca-Cola and Red Bull and so on. So the Aquilinis, yes, the team itself is not necessarily going to make them a lot of money, but the sponsorship agreements and the actual hosting of the events and all the things that go around it, the broadcasting of those events, the Twitch streaming, et cetera, I think that would be kind of where the next stuff comes. And then where Dan is concentrating is exciting as well. The real estate side, and which is of interest to us as well, because you do have to be ubiquitous in how you spread out all of this infrastructure to be able to access the players. But the real estate side of things and the stadium side of things is also exciting too.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the biggest challenges that needs to be figured out is really the business model around just creating that content. Because you think about it today, all that content's for free. Twitch, YouTube, you name it. I mean, even in real life, we look at Red Bull TV, everything on there is free. So this creates a bigger challenge that historically, traditionally, owning that content, you could actually sell it. Today, you can't.
So a lot of the people who are Twitch streamers that are successful and making a large amount of money, Ninja was mentioned. Ninja took 2 days off and lost 40,000 subscribers at $5 a piece. So, the pressure is on for those guys to not just run it like a professional business, but to be on every single day to the point where burnout's a real thing. But Twitch is actually having a bit of a struggle with its streamers in that they're trying to claw back some of the money that's actually being given through donations and through bits to the streamers and trying to come up with ways that they can get their 30% in on everything. So I would suggest that there's already that monetization model of who owns the content, that the war is just starting.
That's right.
We've got about 35 seconds. Just quickly, what should people look out for if they're looking to invest in the esports or greater tech model? What is the one thing that you would suggest that they would do to avoid getting into something like Cannabis 2014 where everything falls over?
I guess just like any investment, the first thing you're going to look at is the team. You're going to look at the experience that they have. Are these guys members of the industry? Have they done it before? Have they been there and have the contacts and connections to be able to make these deals happen? I think that'd be the first thing I would look at.
Daniel?
It's a massive industry. So I think everything we said here is that there's a level of how much money people are making, but there's also opportunity here, new parts of the industry that are coming, and so it's a good opportunity to jump early. I think some access, so training facilities very early stages at this point, and stadiums, tournaments is still very early. So there's a lot of things that are just starting now, or you can go to a more established company and they're producing the games as well. So there's both sides of it.
I would say just look for the audience that can scale. That's the most important thing. There are a lot of great ideas out there. There are some wicked minds creating great plans and strategies, but if there is not a path to a scale audience, then it's going to be short-lived.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it very much.